Steve Orsini, he wears several titles: Secretary of Cabinet, Head of the Ontario Public Service, and Clerk of the Executive Council. What does all that mean? Basically, Steve runs the provincial government. He's the top-ranking public servant. He's the CEO of the province. So in short, that's what he is. He has tremendous experience in the public service, 25 years. He was Deputy Minister of Finance and Secretary of Treasury Board before that. He held a number of positions at the Ontario Hospital Association, including Vice President, Policy and Public Affairs. Since his appointment, we've met frequently already to discuss issues of mutual concern. And at his request, we've set up quarterly meetings where we come in, or I come in, often accompanied by Barb Finley, and we just review issues, and he wants to know, just as a good administrator, when issues are percolating, a heads up. He also wants to hear the good news. He wants to hear the behind the scenes. And I think he was very surprised at our meeting when I told him about all the work we actually do behind the scenes. Obviously, what makes it to the paper are the big reports, systemic work, but we do a lot of work behind the scenes. We have 27,000 complaints per year, as you know by now, and only 5-6 systemic reports a year. So all the rest just get resolved in the mix. We always get excellent cooperation from the entire government. And we're extremely honored and pleased to have him here. It's a little bit like walking to the lion's den, I suppose, with all these overseers, but we're actually very nice people. So thank you, and please help me welcome Steve Orsini.
Thank you, Andre, for that introduction. And he's absolutely right. Since I've joined as Secretary of Cabinet, we've had a number of meetings, and he's been willing to come in and have open, frank conversations, and I really welcome that. So thank you for inviting me here today. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to this group and to see a number of people from the OPS working with the Ombudsman, not only within Ontario, but in other jurisdictions. From my perspective, this is a really important partnership. And this is really where I want to devote my time and attention today to talk about this partnership and how we can build on it for the future. And if I had to sort of think back and say, how do I look at this relationship, and I had to find an analogy, I'd say if I was a private sector company and someone was saying to me, well, we're going to give you an independent agency that's going to look at all your customer complaints, find out why they may be going to your competitors, finding out things that you could do a better job in providing services to your customers, grow your business. You said, that's fantastic. You know, that'd be important. We would want to know that. Now, if you told the CEO, by the way, we're going to all make it public before you have a chance to deal with it, they might be less thrilled. But that's a private business. In government, it's different. They may not have a choice. They may not be able to go to a competitor because we might be the only source of service that they have access to, which is why openness and transparency is so crucial to how we will continually reform, enhance our public services. So that symbiotic relationship between, and I'll go through this in my presentation, between the role of the Ombudsman working with the public service, we have the same goal in mind, and that's enhancing public services. So that's the ultimate objective that we both share. So I'm going to go through 4 key areas of my presentation. The first one is really looking at the complex world we live in. And I think that's important from a number of perspectives. And we've only seen this recently with the price of oil falling, the value of the dollar changing relative to the U.S., and suddenly economic fortunes across Canada has fundamentally changed. Now, is it there permanently or short-term or not? It does change how governments look at their ability to provide services to their citizens. So it's important to look at the broad global context. The second area we're looking at, we live in a more complex world, not less. And we have to understand complex systems and how we see change affecting that system and how people are affected by that change. The third area, and we believe that transparency and accountability is a huge enabler of change. There was a U.S. Supreme Court judge that said sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that really helps to address and showcase things that help motivate change for the better, and we're all committed, and the Premier's committed towards that. And last one, building a stronger partnership with the Ombudsman's office. So those are the 4 objectives, and then hopefully we have time for questions. So on the complex global environment, and the reason why I want to spend a bit of time on that, it does affect how government looks at their ability to provide services. And when I was Deputy Minister of Finance, I used to present information like this, and I used to have complicated charts, graphs, tables. And ever since I joined the Cabinet Office, they removed those sharp instruments from my presentation. Someone might get hurt, me. So I think I'm going to just be more of a narrative. And if you look at it, we have to understand we're living in a society that the population is aging. So even if your services were working well, you have to figure out that as society ages, you have to change and keep up with that. In global economic uncertainty, we've seen overnight how some provinces are facing a dramatic change in their revenue picture because, for example, the price of oil. That affects how you look at your ability to deliver those programs and services. Ontario is wrestling with a deficit, and it's going to take us time and effort to move forward with a very strong, effective expenditure management plan to balance by 17-18. That, again, shapes how we can deliver our public services, and what does that mean to our citizens benefiting from those services. Changing public expectations. You have a world where immediate gratification on the consumer side is going to change how the public expects instant gratification or information on the public side. And that's going to, again, just if you were delivering a good program, public expectations would change. That affects how the public would view the services you're providing. Climate change. You know, even if you had a great program and services working well, we might find, you know what, our carbon footprint is too big for us to continue to do things the way we're doing. And that could fundamentally change. And as we know, the world is gearing up for Paris next year, or the end of this year, on setting new climate change targets. And how does that affect us? Growing innovation imperative, global competition. We can't stand still. We're going to have to drive our ability to be more productive and innovative to continue the change of how we do things, because the world's not standing still, and neither can we. Diverse communities. Yes, we have 2 official languages we need to communicate in, but we have very diverse community. We need to reach out to connect with people in their different languages, different cultures, and different ways of communicating in a way to reach a very diverse population. That is changing all the time. It means we have to change with that. So in that broad context, I want to go to the next section and just highlight how something you all know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but we live in very complex organizations. And this is just a schematic. It's a conceptual diagram that tries to look at all the different components that go into delivering a program and service. You have the policy area that designs what program and service we're trying to provide to the citizens of the jurisdictions. You have the operations, and that is becoming more and more complex as we adopt new technologies. Different delivery channels. You have encounter experience or online. The skills and human resources that go with it, the legal issues you have to address, ability to communicate. It goes around. Anytime you change one part of that, it affects others. And sometimes the change can be so seamless and effective that dramatically change how we provide a program. I'll tell you one example. This is several years ago when I was Deputy Minister of Revenue, before I went to Finance. We had, working with the Family Responsibility Office, we had a huge machine in Oshawa, a scanning device that would do open-face scanning at thousands of documents in a short period of time. And we had this unused capacity, and we offered that up to the Family Responsibility Office and said, you know what, we'll digitize all your paperwork. And we'll have optical character recognition. So we'll read a check and we'll electronically deposit it the same day. And it took a bit of time. We converted the system, and it was like night and day. It would take up to a month to open up a new case file. We did it within 48 hours. People knew if a check was cashed, they could trace it back. No one had to look for a paper file. So sometimes you can dramatically improve services on the back end, but it made it a lot easier when someone called in and said, "Where's my check?" They were able to call it up electronically and tell people where it is. And as we've seen, sometimes when you move with new technology and new IT systems, there's always complexity and issues in the implementation. So what would be a simple transformation in a world of complex organizations requires a lot more time and effort. Those are one example, but we have to understand there's more elements, there's more interconnected aspects of any program and service that when we want to change one part of it, we really need a multidisciplinary approach to do so. So I want to say part of that is we need to constantly review how we deliver our services. And one of the best parts of doing that is to have really an open and transparent process. And the first part is engaging the public. Now, the Ombudsman's office plays a huge role because you're often the first point of contact if someone's unhappy. Andre was telling me he just got a tweet today on an issue. He retweeted it, and within minutes it got fixed. And that was that public interface. And I think examples of that increasing public engagement is important. But we should also engage not only on those complaining about a service, but engaging on whether or not we could do better in delivering a service. So yes, we operate a bit on the complaints-based process, but I know the Ombudsman's office, I know you're looking at better ways to really evaluate programs that maybe aren't necessarily entirely based on complaints. Some people may not just complain. They may be too vulnerable to identify themselves as a complainant. And there's other ways to really engage the public. So I think the role in the Ombudsman's office, the role of the public service reaching out, I think together we can get a much better appreciation of how people value those services we're providing. Being open and transparent. As I showed you that complex a diagram of complex organizations, and on top of it was policy. And part of it is the design of how we deliver programs. A lot of times we roll out a program and we get feedback at the end of the continuum where people now see the program in its operation, and then we get complaints or we get feedback then. What the government's done, and the Premier's been committed to being very open and transparent, for the first time in Ontario's history, we released all the mandate letters that the Premier has written to ministers. So these are direct instructions from the Premier to the minister saying, here's all your priorities, here's all the things you have to work on. And it's really open sourcing the design of these programs that at some point will be implemented. So moving upstream in terms of getting that early engagement, we believe will help and enhance our ability to deliver those services. More upfront consultation, more upfront engagement, we believe will have a better downstream results. The last area is really improving access to data and information. And there's a lot of jurisdictions really having open data, open government. This is something that we're seized with. There's a group charged within Treasury Board Secretariat looking at putting more and more data on the internet for people to access. We have an open data website now. There's over 200 data sets. And the potential is unlimited to what people can look at that data. There's a few examples in the UK and the US, New York State. There was a professor from Harvard, Lieberman, who wrote a paper of how they put data, open data outside, and entrepreneurs came in and said, we can find a much better way to deliver those services, and that led to some social innovation, impact investing. And that's the type of information and exchange and building partnerships that we believe will also help us define new and innovative ways that we can deliver public services. So the next chart really looks at our overall governance structure. you know, governance in the public service is really important to how do you make changes? Let's say you get complaints coming in, and let's start with the bottom right-hand quadrant. That's the public. They'll raise either complaints or concerns of not getting access to this, or they want changes to a particular program. So that constant public engagement I just talked about. The role of the legislature and the officers are crucial. And that's the top right-hand quadrant. And we're seeing that becoming more important, not less. The recent changes made in Bill 8 to give the Ombudsman's office greater authorities to now include municipalities, with a little asterisk for the City of Toronto, but municipalities, school boards, and universities is a big confidence booster in the role of the Ombudsman to expand its authorities, and that is viewed as a positive thing. But this, you have the legislative officers, you also have the legislative committees. If the issues are big enough, there might be a whole committee of the legislature devoted to looking into those areas. And that shapes the executive council view of those programs and area, and those issues then come to cabinet for a decision. And then the public servants, the deputy ministers and others, agencies, boards, and commissions are then tasked with implementation. And it's that constant feedback. So all these are interacting, but the role of officers, I just wanted to score, the role of the Ombudsman is viewed as a very important partner, and its importance is increasing as a result of that. So I want to go through the important roles we see of the Ombudsman's office and opportunities to work in partnership. So the early warning, I mentioned early warning as, if we can hear something, ministries may not know someone or an issue has surfaced, having that early warning and have it addressed quickly saves time and effort. No, and so, but the early warning, I can't tell you how important that is from our perspective. If there's something that is not connecting correctly and it can be fixed, having that information sooner just makes sense. It allows the Ombudsman's office, it allows the ministry to move on to more complex systemic issues, which we'll all come to. Early and speedy resolution is important. A lot of times, you need to draw quick attention to something. You need to mobilize resources and decisions very quickly to address them. That's important. Builds confidence in the public community that the role in the Ombudsman's office, and also the receptive nature of the public service to address these issues. So speedy resolution of complaints is important. The last area I want to spend a little more time on this chart and next about the systemic nature of these issues. We're living in a much more complex world where there's more players. So we talk about complex organizations. Imagine we have a number of different organizations trying to address the same issue or provide a similar service to the same group in society. And I think the fact that you created your special, as I understand, the Special Ombudsman Response Team that understands it takes more, there's more skills and complexity associated with these systemic reviews is an important recognition of that. And you've done a lot in that areas, and you've had a important impact benefits to the public service and to the population by a number of things you've done, an unlicensed daycare, addressing excessive force and with inmates and so forth, a number of examples where the Ombudsman can show demonstrable benefits from having that by their systemic reviews. I've also talked about balanced investigations, and I know Andre supports this. It's very important that we talk about things that work as well when we identify things that may not work as well. Because we may, if we only focus on things that are not working, undermine things that are working well. And that's important where we need to build on our successes while we shore up areas that need to be addressed. And I think that balance, that a very sophisticated, systematic review of an area, identify both the strengths and weaknesses, it's hugely valuable to the public service and one that we would welcome and work in partnership with you. So the next slide, I want to spend a bit of time on the really systemic reviews. So we live in a world where we just don't need we don't want to rely only on complaints to evaluate, are we providing services effectively or not? And I spent, as Andre mentioned, I spent some time in the healthcare sector, 7 years with the Ontario Hospital Association. And we knew that, and this chart here is just a generic chart. You could put any program at the center and any number of different ministries and government agencies around this chart. But if you looked at healthcare, you'd have the patient in the middle, you'd have a hospital, you'd have a physician's office, home care, maybe long-term care, pharmacy, and so forth. There's so many different players trying to affect change for that patient. And if you use an example, let's say you're reviewing the role of a hospital, and you're looking at, well, you know, the infection rate is fairly high, and so obviously the hospital's not doing something right. And so you look at the, you know, patient has surgery, they're discharged, they come back a week later with an infection. The question is, was it the hospital, or is it lack of family support, physician support in the community? Was it long-term care, home care support? It may not necessarily be the program area that we're reviewing. Another example I took back from the years I spent in the healthcare sector was medical error. And a lot of times they looked at medical error and said, you know, the point of the error occurred between the healthcare practitioner and the patient. Okay, that's where the error occurred. Let's say the wrong dosage was applied. And what they found when they researched is, said, well, you know what, that's not where the error, that's where it occurred, but the root cause of it was because the two vials that the manufacturer makes were out, because they wanted to save money, was identical. They looked the same. The labeling was slightly different, or the color differentiation was not sufficient enough in the fast-paced emergency world of an emergency department that you can distinguish the differences in that environment. And so they did a lot of work at looking at the root causes of issues. And if you extend that to all the programs and services we provide, I think this is a really exciting area of public policy, is that we're moving from a program lens to the client lens of how we deliver services. And you just look at youth at risk. We have so many ministries delivering programs to help the youth. We got non-government organizations, you know, that are helping the youth. You got municipalities that have service to help the youth. And they still may fall through the cracks because we don't have these wraparound services that has some point of contact to say we'd be able to move that person through the system much more effectively than each program area trying to redouble their efforts to improve how that one slice of how they deal with that individual. And when I met with Andre, I said, you know, this is an important area of public policy. Healthcare, we're really tackling in healthcare. The government's health action plan really moved to a patient-centered care model through a variety of instruments, health links, and a variety of other things to say we need to look at the individual providing the service to, not the providers that deliver the service. It's a different orientation. It's a much more difficult thing to tackle because we're governed on a ministry-by-ministry program, but our clients are not governed in that capacity, and that's going to require us working together horizontally across different organizations. And we have launched a number of programs within the OPS to begin to look at it from that lens. And I think I'm very optimistic that they will really be able to drive important change by changing how we look at change. And so that's one area I wanted to flag, because a lot of times in your investigations you may see something that we don't. You know, when you assess the whole, it's obviously greater than the sum of its parts, and you might see things when you get complaints coming in that say, yes, that program was responsible for it, but it was something else more systemic that led to that issue. And that type of information, advice, analysis would be quite beneficial as we look at how we transform our programs overall. So the last part, and then I'm happy to take questions, is really say how can we work as partners. And we know when a complaint's raised or the Ombudsman's office identifies an issue, an investigation they want to undertake, there's a number of important things that we need to do in the respective area of the government that might be under the review, is to ensure that we have a point person. that would be able to facilitate and navigate and support the review itself. So a single point person to help coordinate. Establish linkages with other ministries that might be involved. It's to make sure we provide that horizontal linkages, to ensure that we have open and frequent communication. These are like the critical success factors to support these reviews. And to understand that the Ombudsman has authorities for access to information that we want to support, so they have the information to conduct those systemic reviews that at the end of the day we will believe will help improve the system overall. We're in a complex, fast-paced world, and I think everyone's busy, and the more we can share information, the more we can work together, the more we'll be successful each in our own areas of responsibility. So with that, I'd like to conclude and then open it up for questions, but thank you. Okay, I'll start. No, go ahead. Andre, you're about to ask? No, I was going to. Okay. Go ahead. No, I was, the question is how, and this is more a question overall, expanding, I think it's exciting to expand the role of the Ombudsman. There's anything we can do to help in your efforts to expand your role for universities, school boards, and municipalities. I mean, it's a daunting expansion of your mandate. It's an exciting one. I know you've embraced it with open arms, but it is it's a big change. And I know when we talked about how to phase that in to manage that process will be something that you'll have to think about.
Most of this audience here is, of course, for watchdogs. Most of the people here are investigators. Some are in the government, but as you know, but most are outside government like us. And I was just wondering, from your perspective on the inside, could you give us a sense of what it's like when you find out that the Ombudsman is coming, or another watchdog is investigating? What's the sense of, we can only imagine, and from our experience we know what kind of reaction we get, but what's it really like on the inside of the public service when they hear that we're coming?
Well, yeah, I'd say it's a great question. I think people think it may be more adversarial just by the nature of it than it really is. The public services will be criticized by media, by stakeholders all the time. So it's a question. I think they'd want. I think the biggest concern would they get a fair shake? Would they get a fair assessment? And I think when we talk to officers, I think there's a genuine need that people genuinely feel that whether you're an investigator, or you're a recipient of a review, that facts speak volume. And I think once you're engaged, I think the initial there's trepidation, I'd say, but once you're engaged and you start laying it out, you start seeing that, and there's learnings going along the way, that's why early and frequent communications remove some of that trepidation. But I think the word I would say trepidation, not knowing what would come out of it. And I think as investigators, one of the most important groups that I found when I was in finance was internal audit. And they were a huge asset. You'd send them in, and they won't agree with the program area they're reviewing, but they gave me, as Deputy Minister of Finance, tremendous information. So I just say that the investigators are your friend. You may not interpret it that way. And I think the other thing is, if a lot of things, and Andre mentioned this to me, a lot of times issues get addressed before the report's made public. And I think what helps is giving the government ability to correct it quickly. And we've always said that if you have identified an issue, continue to write up your report, but once we know there's a problem in the system, we're obligated to fix it immediately. This is not to undermine your ultimate report to say, look, but a lot of times, and you'll see this with the Auditor General's report, you'll see the management response as, well, we have addressed it. And I think both have been successful, that the officer has raised an issue and the organization has responded to fix it. And I think that, to me, is success. So trepidation, maybe feeling adversarial, but I think the more we can engage and start walking through the issues, the better. And if there is that tension in the system, then we have to work together to deal with it. I think engaging more often, talking about the mutual benefits, talking about trying to be that balance. Here's what's working well. Here's what could be done better, would put people in a better state, I'd say. The fact that this is called sharpening your teeth is a little bit intimidating. I thought I might leave with bite marks or something, but I really do think that we should not fear being questioned. As soon as we do that, then we're going to undermine our long-term success, right? That's a great question.
I just have a question. In terms of Treasury Board, when these reports come out, it costs money for the organization or for the ministries to fix these problems. So how does Treasury Board prioritize if they have to come up with more money to deal with these larger systemic issues? How do you balance that at a time when we're supposed to be, we're under constraints in our ministries, and this becomes a priority? So how do you do that at Treasury Board?
So it's another good question. I think we're constantly under pressure to find, even if a program's working well, to find ways to deliver it more efficiently. We're under, and we're not alone. Like, you're looking around the world, it's the Western economies are growing much slowly than they have in the past, and we know with demographic changes and aging, we're going to have more pressure, not less. And so in Ontario's economy has been more modest, growing more modestly. And in the last 3 or 4 budgets, our revenue forecasts have been taken down each and every year. And our forecast has gone down by billions of dollars just because our growth rates, based on private sector averages, have not met the expectations. So we're always, the government has to decide on overall triaging or prioritization of the project. If you identify issues, and you have, like unlicensed daycare, you've identified issues that the government says we're going to have to deal with it. And we're going to have to look at some other area of government that may not have the same priority. That doesn't mean the Ombudsman doesn't bring forward those important public policy issues. Like, you need to bring those forward. What I think we need to do is in working with you, is to say, you know what, there's different ways to approach it. I think you're doing the right thing by saying, here's the issue. And we need to say, well, can we, if we did it this way, it might be more cost effective than that. Well, like, is there dialogue about how the best way to resolve it? Or the direction you may want to give government, or how government responds. But I think we need to be, we need to look at different ways to solve that issue in the most cost-effective manner possible. There's a lot of things that we think we're doing well, but we don't get the outcomes. And we're challenging ourselves internally and say, even if no one's complaining, we spend $1 billion a year in refundable tax credit for business, and I don't think I got one complaint other than they're not generous enough. But that doesn't mean they're not working well at all. It may not be incremental. They may go into firms that would have done the investments in R&D anyways, or training, or whatnot. So we need to look at all our programs and services and address that question through reprioritizing our spending priorities. If it's important enough, the government will find a way to deal with it, especially if you're talking about public health and safety, people at risk, youth, children. It's a priority for government. And so I think, but it is one that we're constantly challenged with, and we're not alone. It's a global phenomenon. We're going to be increasingly faced with that issue of how can we deliver services more effectively, which is why we want to work with you. The effort, your investigation, if you can find something that we would have spent money on to investigate and understand, why duplicate it? But, I've had a couple of conversations with Andre, and I really appreciate his outreach. I really appreciate the leadership, and the fact you invited me here today is a really welcome opportunity for me. And I'm hoping to invite Andre to our Deputy Minister's Council in the near term, because we need to have this ongoing conversation. This is, for me, since I've been appointed in July, this is the start, not the a one-year event from my perspective, of the conversation we need to have together.
Sorry. Thank you. The ombudsman has a lot of profile, I guess, because his investigations are triggered by public complaints that come out in the media. How does the Auditor General, and if you ask me, unfortunately, I don't know who that person is, how does the Auditor General choose the cases or the high-profile cases that go into his report?
So, I mean, each officer has the guiding legislation that directs. So, the Auditor General, Bonnie Lysak, she, sometimes it could be the Standing Committee. I showed that governance, that the Standing Committee of Public Accounts plays an important role, because they will often, and it has members of all three parties on it, asking the Auditor General to investigate. And these are special investigations, and we've had a number of them. We want the, and we want audit, our internal audit, even if no one is talking about a program, we would sometimes send the internal audit in to ensure that area is working effectively. It's not necessarily a complaint-driven process. It's a different process. So when I was vice chair of our corporate audit committee, and that's Deputy Minister sit on that, and the head of internal audit is a support, and we have external advisors on it. We try to have a enterprise risk framework. And it's a different, and maybe this is the way we have to think about it, any type of risk management, is we look at we're a $130 billion corporation. You know, we have over 208 different agencies, over 60,000 employees, and then where our funding affects 1.3 million public servants, if you look at the broader public sector. And we sit back and say, well, if we only go by complaints, we might be missing the important things. So we've been investing a lot of time in and say, okay, where's the risk profile? We look at all the different things that we're doing and say, some of them that are pretty low risk, high impact, we might want to make sure we audit from time to time. Things that are high impact and high risk, we should be all over it. But we have to create an assessment to measure risk and to weigh risks across ministries, agencies effectively, and that's an ongoing process. But we should base it on, it's like the, let's say the Canada Revenue Agency would look at, would they audit individual cases based on where they think there would be problems, and that's the way I would suspect the Auditor General doesn't. But I don't know for sure. I haven't had a conversation with her. But it's either a direct request from the Standing Committee or based on what they think are areas that they should be investigating. I think officers play different roles. There's a new officer, the Financial Accountability Officer. Legislation was approved a year and a half ago. They're currently recruiting. And that officer will play a completely different role than the Auditor General or the Ombudsman. A Financial Accountability Officer, like the Canadian Federal Parliamentary Budget Officer, will look at different things. And so we're going to have, this is where it makes my life more interesting, we're going to have another officer looking at where the financial accountability of the province. It could be where where we think our revenue is going, our risks to balancing the budget. There's so many things that financial officer could look at that it's going to open up whole new avenues of dialogue. And my philosophy is embrace the change and work with that process to make it as workable and as beneficial as it could be. as opposed to trying to avoid it and ignore it and hope it goes away. That is not a good strategy.
One more question, and then come back to run the government.
Just on back to sort of effective service delivery, and you mentioned the more we can share, the more we can be successful. A lot of our complaints are due to sort of come in based on incomplete information being received from frontline, service delivery staff. So how do you instill this culture, this sort of ethos of openness and sharing, not just with us or within departments, but actually to the public, to the individual client when they call in and say, hey, I don't understand this document you sent me, or hey, can you help me understand why we got to this decision?
So, I mean, there's so many different, so I think the underlying philosophy there is, I think by being more open and transparent, hopefully we'll reduce those. But a lot of our information are not easily accessible even to our frontline staff. I talked about FRO. It was so difficult they couldn't answer a simple question because they didn't have information readily available. So it really depends. Can we empower our frontline staff to be able to discuss that? So that's a good question. In some areas it might be legally restricted what they can share. I'll give you a perfect case example that, is just, frustrating, I'd say is the right word. We have the Ontario Works program that is administered by municipalities, and we have the Ontario Disability Support Program administered by the province of Ontario. They're both part of our social assistance support network. They can't share information because of personal privacy. So if someone, so when someone says I'm on OW and I can't work, but now I'm injured or I have a situation where I want to go in ODSP, they have to apply to a different program. And obviously they would be frustrated with us. I would be. But we can, and that's one thing we're going to need to tackle over time. So part of it could be a legal barrier. Part of it is we haven't empowered our frontline staff with the technology so it's readily available. And so I think it depends on it, but I think you're raising some really important questions. I think asking those questions and then having me and others think about maybe we're not doing enough in that area. Giving information, it should be the easiest part of connecting with the public. And the Premier started with her policy agenda, which is a big step forward to say we're going to open source our policy agenda and start from there and just work our way down. But it's a complex question, but I can see why people get frustrated. And with Service Ontario, we did try to consolidate a number of call centers, our in-counter services, and we still have a long way to go. And so we're looking at Service Ontario further. Is there further opportunities to make the system easier for clients? And we're going to be talking to the secretaries of cabinet across the country, and we're looking at what we can do federal and provincially later this week, because we got some locations in Ontario have Service Canada, Service Ontario, and the municipality services. They might be close together, which is better than not, but we're still fragmented. Just one example, starting your own business, the federal government has a site of everything you need to start your own business. Well, Ontario has its own site, everything you need to start your own business. And a number of municipalities have everything you need to start your own business. That's not a complaint per se, but it will drive people, it'll frustrate them. And that's why we need to constantly review how we can transform how we deliver services more effectively. And I think the Ombudsman and the watchdogs, or whatever you want to call it, play a huge role for that, because that's one part of it. But it can't only be a complaints-driven, because you raised, and it might originate from a complaints-driven, but we could just remove frustration-driven levels that exist because we haven't delivered those services more effectively. And we have a compelling fiscal reason to do that. So anyways, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for your very informative presentation. When I invited Steve to speak to this group, he immediately accepted. And today you saw that he delivered his presentation with a lot of candor, diplomacy as well, but it was very informative. I think that we'd like to see our role when we make recommendations to improve not only efficiency of government, but long-term to save costs. And I think that we're going to be working on that. There was a very interesting message that you passed on, and I think the onus will be on us to demonstrate the cost we save to the system. Sure, when we come out with a report such as daycares, where we found that the system lacked inspectors, the government's going to have to go out and hire people, the code as well. There's investments that have to be done on the front end, but there are other cases like newborn screening that was resulting in 25 baby deaths and 25 severely impaired babies entering the world. The cost to the system of dealing with those 25 severely impaired babies that grow into adults, and the cost to the system, whereas updating newborn screening simply costs just a matter of a few million. So there are cases like that, the lawsuits involving the children in those daycares that suffered, the cost to the system of having litigation. The lottery case, I spoke this morning when we got in and uncovered all this fraud in the lottery system. Ticket sales dipped. The OLG lost some money. They had to invest money into enhancing security. But then what we saw the following year is that lottery ticket sales hit the roof. So I think that we need to do a better job in selling the government on the value of our work in the long term. Implementing recommendations costs money, not all the time, but in some instances. But the system gets long-term dividends, and I think the onus is on us to demonstrate that better to the government. So thank you again, Steve, and to thank you, we offer you a gift from the Ombudsman's office that you don't have to declare to anybody, but you have to display on your desk and drink coffee from it every day.